Welcome to the Collage Photomontage Artists Workshop. Before we start making, let's explore the ideas behind what we will be doing. Art and creativity are an indispensable part of life. We've been exploring our place in the world, or maybe even the universe, for over 40,000 years through art. As far as we know, starting with the cave paintings in places such as Lascaux, but we may yet unearth even earlier examples of our artistic expression. We're all part of the human race with shared existence, but we are also individuals who all see the world a little differently. Art helps us see. The artist presents their worldview to us through their work. Through this, we can begin to understand the world beyond the way that we see it or we experience it. And I would say that when we do that, we can then begin to accept the world in a different way to that which we see it, and potentially modify ourselves, our behaviour, and how we respond and react to it. Not until we have done this can we be who we truly are as people, our fullest self. I'll leave you to chew on those thoughts. Now let's look at the definitions and the nuts and bolts behind what we'll be doing. The term collage is taken from the French coller, meaning to glue or to stick together. Okay? It's a technique of art creation primarily used in the visual art but also in music, by which art results from an assemblage or collection of different forms, thus creating a whole new object or visual piece of work. Let's take a look at our first example of a collage or a photomontage. We can see they've used this wide open, richly coloured desert scene for their background. And then on this background they've added these disparate elements or these new pieces that they've found from other images and stuck down onto the background. Some of them are relating to one another, such as the crow in the foreground here is perhaps pecking or maybe sniffing even at this flower in front of it, whilst some of the other elements don't obviously appear to be interacting with each other in that same way. But one thing that does stand out for me is how the parts of the landscape are used to help to anchor these newly added elements. So we see the birds are visually held in place by their positioning near or over these large rock forms. This strange disembodied pair of legs have been placed on this flat, plain-like area of the landscape, and the head here, the back of it is anchored to this rock structure. And in the foreground, the crow is almost sort of standing on this triangular piece of rock here. So at some level we might feel that this is quite a difficult image to read or understand. They feel very surreal, but we can safely assume that the artist has had considerable intent in how they've been placed. And also each viewer will bring their own understanding or meaning to the object as they see it. Let's move on now. What about the term photomontage? What do we take that to mean? Well, it's the process and result of making a new image by taking pieces from several or many other photographs. We then cut glue, rearrange and overlap these parts into our new image. Sometimes we will then take this resulting composition or composite image and photograph it, and that way we will have an image which appears more seamless, doesn't show so many of the joins and the cut marks, and is flat, because we will no longer have those many layers of that composition. Our next image, whilst it is still a photo montage or a collage, it's worth noting that it's made through a different process to that image I just showed you. Whereas that first image was an assemblage of pieces from prints cut out with a knife or scissors and stuck down onto that new background, this image has been made digitally, so based on the computer, on the screen. Same idea, taking elements from other pictures and combining them into a new visual composition. It's very surreal, isn't it? The moon has now become this person's head and wrapped in this black headscarf. What do the butterflies mean? What about the desert and the stars, this starry background? We can safely assume that this all has a meaning. We may not fully understand what it is. We may bring our own new meaning to it. But either way, the artist has given us an insight into how they view the world. Here's another image by the same artist. This one's called From the Depths of the Subconscious. Again, it's a digital photo montage, and this time we see an owl flying against this background. It's a background maybe a little hard to tell what it is. Are those stars? Is that a background just blurry? Or maybe it's a combination of both of those things to hint at something else. And we've got a common element in this one of the moon. And again, the moon has become a head, hasn't it? It's become the head of this owl. We see it's got its beak here and the eyes where you'd expect to see them, but certainly not the kind of head you would expect to see. Again, another insight into how this artist sees the world and is trying to say something to us about that. I've mentioned the surreal nature of these images, and we're going to let that be our inspiration for this workshop. The ideas behind the Surrealist movement fit very well with the collage or photo montage way of making visual art. But what is Surrealism? Who were they? Well, I've just mentioned that it was an art movement. It started in 1917, but don't let that fool you, it's still going strong today. And I believe that's because it speaks to something deep inside us. It speaks of another reality, one we can access through symbols. Some believe our subconscious operates purely with symbols. It doesn't see or understand the world in quite the same way that our conscious mind does. Here are some definitions of what the Surrealist movement was about. A literary and artistic movement of the 1900s that attempts to express the workings of the subconscious and is characterized by fantastic imagery and incongruous juxtaposition of subject matter. Here's another. An artistic movement and an aesthetic philosophy that aims for the liberation of the mind by emphasizing the critical and imaginative powers of the subconscious. And lastly, the 20th century movement of artists and writers that developed out of Dadaism, a movement that came before Surrealism, who use fantastic images and incongruous juxtapositions in order to represent unconscious thoughts and dreams. There are definitely some common elements running through those three definitions, aren't there? Fantastic imagery, juxtaposition, and the imaginative powers of the subconscious, of thoughts and dreams. So we can see and understand that surrealist art uses those ideas and techniques to explore the mind, for the artist to explore their mind and for the viewer to explore their own. Let's have a look at a couple more examples. These are from two artists who rose to prominence in the early 20th century. Picasso used Surrealism, but also other art movements of the time. And whilst Moholy-Nagy was not a Surrealist, he was a constructivist. But they both used collage, and that's what we're interested and are looking at today. The image on the left is by Pablo Picasso, and he's got a very particular approach to his collage here, hasn't he? He's got elements of photography, but he's also taken pieces of a painting and added those. Graphic symbols from playing cards and put those in there as well in several different places. So that's another approach, combining photography, drawing or painting and graphic elements. The image on the right is titled Jealousy and was made in 1927 by Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. Again, a different approach to what we could term a collage or a photomontage. He's taken various elements, one of which is pieces of photographs which he's stuck down onto the background. But he's also started to add elements of drawing in there. Geometric shapes, such as this rectangle on its short edge. Silhouettes of people, both positive and negative, or black and white. And tried to suggest a relation between those elements by their positioning and the connection of this diagonal line that runs between the two. So, what I want you to take away from that is the fact that we shouldn't feel restricted in our compositions to just using photographic imagery. We can use drawing that we've done, or pictures of paintings that we've found and have cut up or cut out and added to our composition. We can use solid blocks of colour in there, cut from coloured paper, or maybe drawn directly onto our background using pastels, marker pens. Anything we feel is relevant, anything we prefer, but letting our creative imagination flow. Here's another example by an artist named Eugenia Liu. She employs a technique that's quite popular at the moment, whereby the creator cuts elements from vintage books, magazines and catalogues and combines those into fantastic new creations to prompt our imagination and make us wonder at the content of our subconscious mind. You might remember I've mentioned symbols a couple of times already. Well, now let's look at some definitions of what they are. Well, symbols are a means of complex communication that usually have multiple levels of meaning. Here's another way of thinking about what symbols are. Symbols are the basis of all human understanding and serve as a framework for human knowledge. They facilitate understanding of the world in which we live, thus serving as the grounds upon which we make judgments and associations. Through this, people use symbols not only to make sense of the world around them, but also to identify and cooperate in society. Symbols are a big deal then, right? The book, Signs and Symbols, states that a symbol is a visual image or sign representing an idea, a deeper indicator of a universal truth. Like I said, they're important. Let's look at another image. This one's titled The Insulated Traveller. So let's talk about this image. I'm going to break it down into 3 parts: the landscape, the figure, and the butterfly. Let's start by talking about the figure wearing the spacesuit. The spacesuit acts as a symbol for the masks we wear, the baggage we accumulate, and the walls that our ego builds up around it to protect itself. And so our unfortunate figure lumbers on through life, not breathing the true air of existence. But all is not lost, because redemption can come in the most unlikely of forms. Even a butterfly, through its own metamorphosis from caterpillar to butterfly, it symbolises transformation and regeneration. And from here we can make up our own minds about how or if we apply this to our worldview. So now that we have a good conceptual foundation for what we will be doing, let's limber up our minds to get them in gear for creating. And we're going to do that with a couple of exercises dreamt up by, who better, the Surrealists. The first of these is called a word spinner. Now I'm going to hand you over to Vas Hermeticum, who's going to talk about that and show us how to make it. Can you decipher the symbolism of his appearance? I'll give you some clues. Vas is all about faith, rationalism, creativity and perception. Greetings, collagers. Shall we make a start? So, you can download the word spinner image template from the online image resources at Criw. Okay? Print it out on the thickest paper you can. If you only have normal paper, that's fine. We'll back it with a piece of cardboard. Any cardboard's fine, doesn't need to be very thick. Maybe have a rummage in the recycling bin at home. Should we make a start on cutting it out? Done. I've chosen the one numbered from 1 to 10. But they're all the same, they're just numbered in different ways. Next, take a pencil and push it through the centre of the spinner. Et voila. Now we have, well, a spinner. Simple. Generating a different number each time, or maybe the same number occasionally. Next up, my fellow surrealists, we need to write a list of 10 words, numbered 1 to 10. You can use any words you like, but remember, we're going to be writing a piece of prose or a poem from these words. We've got our list of words, 1 to 10. Let's start spinning. First number, that's landed on 6. So, my word for number 6 is doused. So that is the first word of my piece of prose or my poem. Okay? Spin again. I've got a 4 this time. My word for number 4 is fur. So that is the second word of my poem. Keep going like that. Play around with it until you've got something you're happy with. If you want more words, well, you can always write another list from 1 to 10 and choose appropriately. If you need to add words like and, if, on, so the writing hangs together better, that's fine as well. But the main thing is that we start to unlock the more intuitive and subconscious ideas in our minds. And this kind of thing is going to help us to do that. Here's my first attempt. Doused fur, doused cake, cake quantum, fur find, cloth soup, doused deflect, doused quantum, cake, cake. Pretty strange, huh? So, these unlikely combinations of words are going to help to conjure up unlikely pictures in our minds, help us to think a little more creatively and loosely, okay? Make a few of them. Think about them. See what images they conjure up for you. If you find your spinner is falling on the same number a bit too often, well, it's okay. Maybe give it a little spin again and get a different number. If it's not perfectly central in the middle, it will be a bit like a loaded dice, so it may fall on the same number a lot, but don't worry, just cheat a bit till you get another number. But most of all, have fun with it. This next exercise is called automatic writing. It was devised by the Surrealists, who believed that making yourself write whatever comes into your head without self-editing will lead to creative breakthroughs. You'll need some paper, a pen, and some kind of timer. It doesn't matter what sort, whatever you can get hold of. We're going to set the timer and then write without pausing for that period. Remember, write whatever comes into your head. Don't self-edit it. Just let it flow from your mind. Though uncomfortable at first, it can quickly become a valuable source of ideas. Start writing for a minute, then try 2 minutes, 3 minutes, maybe up to 4. Play around, see what you get. Here's what I wrote with the timer set to 1 minute. Carpet rods floating through a sky of bilateral objects, chased by the Maniphant, caught and cornered with crumpets and mayonnaise. There we go. What's a Maniphant? Cross between a man and an elephant? Now you try. See what you get. Try and clear your mind before you start. Now that we've limbered up our minds and learned some of the surrealist techniques for generating ideas, remember, we can always come back to those if we get some creative block when we're making our collages. You could write a numbered list of the images you have and use the word spinner to generate ideas that way. Or look through the images that you have and do some automatic writing. Chances are some of those thoughts will come through in what you write. Then you can look for similarity, correspondences, ideas, creative breakthroughs that might generate, and you can funnel those into your collage. Now, let's start to look at the process of how we're going to make our collages. There are images online you can use from the Criw online resources, such as these. A range of backdrops and separate elements to add to those backdrops. You don't have to use any of these. You can just as easily go away and find your own images from the internet, from magazines. And remember, it doesn't have to be a background of a picture. It could be a plain background, plain white, or a solid colour. This is the same image, printed twice, but one of them is a mirror of the other. There'll be some of these available on the Criw image resources for you to download and use. I've made a decision as to where I want the join to be, measured and cut. Then I simply line up the two halves like so, and there we have our mirrored image. Remember, whatever you're doing with this process, it's always really important to cut accurately. So, to make this, I was sure to measure top and bottom, draw a line on which to cut, and then take your time making the cut. Because the strength of your finished work will depend largely on how well those elements have been cut and added to it. So take your time. Here's another idea for a background. Two images. Simply add one over the top of the other. Then you have a juxtaposition, or two different images that contrast each other. Then you can begin to add your other elements. You can add drawing, you can add coloured geometric shapes, you can add your imagination. Let's talk about some of the things that we can use to make the cuts for our collage. I've got 3 pairs of scissors here. These ones are the largest, but I can still be quite accurate with them because they've got a very sharp point. They're also good for making longer straight cuts. This pair, a pretty standard pair of scissors. I can still be fairly accurate with them and not bad for long cuts. I've also got a pair of nail scissors here. These are good for small, intricate work. You may well have a pair of these around the house yourself. Lastly, for cutting implements, a craft knife. If you're going to use one of these, you need to get the okay from a parent, guardian, or responsible adult, because this bad boy will have the end of your finger off before you know it. Okay? If you're going to use one of these, a cutting mat's a good idea. It'll stop you damaging whatever table you're working on. If you haven't got a cutting mat, A piece of cardboard can do the same job. Lastly, for making those straight cuts, a ruler's good. You'll need to mark your measurements out and potentially draw a line to follow. Any ruler's fine. This is one I use for my work. It's aluminium. But like I say, any ruler will do the job. Before you start cutting, it's often important to have a plan. You see, in this example, I've made a decision to simplify the shapes that I cut out for the windows. I've cut out these window bars, and I've cut out the part of the return of the wall on the building. If I'd left these in, I would have probably just ended up tearing or breaking these delicate elements. And I think the way I've cut them, it looks perfectly believable. I've also been careful to keep these elements in case I want to add them back in for another composition. I treat all my materials as resources and try and get the most use out of them. I used a craft knife to cut most of these out. You can use scissors, but whichever you use, you'll need to practice to hone your technique to get the results you want. Remember, they're both sharp, so be careful. And if you do find yourself using a craft knife, always cut away from yourself. If you slip, only the paper gets damaged. If you cut towards yourself and slip, you get damaged. Okay? Here's a composition I've been working on. I haven't stuck any of the elements down. And when I'm happy with it, I will photograph it. That photograph will make the layers less obvious. It'll be a more unified, flatter looking image. If you do need to stick anything down, you can use a glue stick, double-sided tape, or PVA glue. If you use PVA glue, I suggest you don't put too much on, or it can distort the paper. Your compositions probably won't look anything like this. This is just my style and how I like to work, the kind of images I like to use. Find your own style. Find the images and the materials that you like. And remember, let the Surrealist inspire you. Let the ideas flow from you. You can always go back and use those exercises of the word spinner and the automatic writing if you need some inspiration. Don't forget to think about the meaning behind your compositions. What do those different elements symbolise for you? Maybe ask family members or friends to see what they think about the meaning and what those elements symbolise. See if they have similar thoughts to you, or whether they think something completely different. Maybe that will affect how you develop the composition, and maybe it won't. It's all up to you. It's your creation. That's nearly it for this workshop. But before I go, let's remind ourselves what we've talked about and our objectives. We're using the Surrealists to inspire our collages and photomontages. Part of that is to use symbolism to attribute meaning to the things we put in our work. Remember, you can always go back to the exercises if you need some inspiration, the word spinner, the automatic writing. We're working our way towards finding our own style and unique way of working. Be careful when using knives and scissors. Remember not to feel restricted in what materials you use in your work. Drawing, painting, coloured paper shapes, your own photos, found imagery from magazines, old books, catalogues, junk mail, the internet. We are surrounded by imagery, so use them to make your own culture. Remember, we need to be mindful of not consuming too many resources in all aspects of life. So, where possible, photograph your compositions so you can reuse the resources. That's all, my young surrealists. Now, go forth and make art.